Jury is going to function this evening and tomorrow. First of all, my name is Roger Finzel, and this is Carl Carter. And we're lawyers, and in a normal grand jury, we would be prosecutors. Neither Carl nor I particularly like the idea of being prosecutors, and we're not considering ourselves as prosecutors, nor do we consider this to be the kind of grand jury that the state would normally run. And I'm just going to speak for a few moments on the way in which this grand jury came together. Over a year ago, several people in Columbia, Maryland, in Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. got together around our mutual concerns about what was happening in southern Africa and what was happening in the northern and western plains and elsewhere in this country to Native American people. And as we met together and discussed and educated ourselves, we discovered that there were many interrelationships about what was going on in both areas of the world as well as other areas. And in order to focus on the interconnectedness of those relationships, we decided to investigate one particular company, Amex, and its activities in both Namibia and in the western and northern plains of this country. When we looked at a format to present the information that we'd put together, we thought of forums and we thought of grand juries, but what we settled on was a grand jury which goes back to the more historical roots of the grand jury itself. Originally, the grand jury was formed in England as a protection for the accused to prevent the king from arbitrarily throwing someone in jail just because he didn't like him. Before anyone could be held for action at trial, they had to go before a grand jury. And these grand juries consisted of citizens in the community, people who knew the accused, people who did in fact have an interest in the outcome of the proceedings. But it was felt that that was a logical place because those people would know and understand what was going on better than others. Of course, today what has happened is that the grand jury has been turned into a tool of prosecutors to use in any way that they or their politics dictate. So what we've done, we've gone back to the old concept of it in investigating this company and its role in these two areas. And we've asked people of Baltimore and Columbia, Maryland, and D.C., people who are black, people who are Native American, people who are white, people who have a great deal of knowledge about one of these areas or one of the struggles, people who have very little knowledge, but people who have an interest in what's going on here and what's going on in Namibia. What we're going to do is present witnesses, and you all have programs on that, and after we've gone through before we present the witnesses, Carl is going to give a brief opening remarks about what we're trying to show about Amex through these witnesses that we're going to be having this evening. One of the things that is very important to recognize is that in this country it is very, very difficult for people, and particularly political people of whatever their persuasion, to get any kind of media coverage of activities. So along with just holding the grand jury, we also decided to videotape the entire 16, 17, 18 hours, edit it down into a usable format for later use elsewhere in the country so that people elsewhere can gain the experience from the work that goes on here tonight and tomorrow. It's ironic to be sitting here with our backs to the Washington Post, which has been engaged, as I think most people here know, in a lengthy strike-busting activities. And the fact that the news media will not cover events like this is also the same reason why the Washington Post engaged in strike-breaking activities against the pressmen. They are not necessarily people who are interested in the same concerns that people who have come here tonight are interested in. They're interested in protecting and promoting the interests of the state. At the conclusion of the grand jury, we'll give what is traditionally called a charge to the grand jury. And what that means, we'll suggest various kinds of indictments that, based on the evidence and the witnesses' testimony, the films, that we're going to have a film tomorrow morning as well, and again we're going to show this film at noon or 1 o'clock tomorrow, and documents that the witnesses will have and present to the grand jury. From that, we'll ask the grand jury to consider bringing various indictments. Now, what always happens in a grand jury is that they bring back what the prosecutor tells them. But in our grand jury, this grand jury is going to be perfectly free to ignore everything we say, to do what they think ought to be done, and to suggest various remedies, not just remedies, but courses of action that we all should be and can be undertaking in terms of lending support to the struggle of the Namibian people and the Indian people in this country. And I'll turn it over to Carl now.
Tonight we'll be exploring the economic, political, and social ramifications of Amex and its subsidiary corporations in Namibia. What we're concerned about is how that corporation operates. During the next 2 days, you will take a look at not only how it operates in Namibia, but also how it operates in the United States and its relationship with Native Americans. Our concern tonight is about its operations in Namibia, its impact on the country. We will be concentrating on one mine in Namibia called the Tsumeb mine, which is in the northern part of Namibia. This mine is only one example of mining techniques and operations in Namibia. Amex's relationship to South Africa, Amex's relationship to the working people of Angola, South Africa, as well as Namibia will be explored. We will be calling a Mr. Nahas, a native of Namibia, who will discuss and talk about the contract labor, working conditions, level of pay, and those social and political conditions under which the Namibian people work. We will be calling a Milo Ann Heckathorn, who will be discussing also the statistical structure and the economic structure of this particular corporation. Elizabeth Landis is a lawyer who works with the United Nations, and she will be discussing the environmental and cultural rights as defined under international law. She will be discussing World Court decisions and UN resolutions concerning Namibia and Amex's relationship and its operation within the context of those laws and court decisions. Dr. Roberts Rhodes will talk about how you undevelop a country, how you start from the beginning to ensure that a country does not develop to its fullest potential. And the best way to understand it is to understand that a country is just like a person. Or a child. If it doesn't go to school, if the facilities for health, for education, if a country can't capitalize off of its own resources, just as a human being can't use its own resources, or his or her own resources, the result is that you have a person who's studied in their mental, psychological, and physical growth. Well, the same thing happens with underdeveloped countries when they are not allowed to profit or to use their own natural resources. Dr. Rhodes will be talking about this particular tactic which is used by international corporations. We will be talking to a Mr. Everett Ehrlich, who will talk about the impact upon the American economy of multinational corporations. In other words, what happens to an economy which harbors such type of corporations. And finally, we will have a Mr. Ted Lockwood, who will be discussing also various ramifications as to Amex's activities. Finally will be Ms. Ellen Chapman, a member of the United Mine Workers, who will talk about the impact and how Amex obtains the natural ores within the ground, the effects of strip mining, and the consequences of strip mining on the health, on the social conditions in which people live. You as grand jurors have to draw conclusions as to this activities, as to the rights of individuals to work under these conditions, as to the impact. It is your duty as grand jurors to bring back indictments, suggestions, or recommendations as to your views or your conclusions, which become the form of indictments in this particular situation, of the corporation's activities.
One more word on format. We'll have a mixed format. Some of the witnesses will give maybe 15-minute presentations, which will be followed by questions and answers. Other of the witnesses may go through a series of questions that either Carl or I will be asking them. After each presentation, the members of the grand jury will have an opportunity to continue questioning in any particular area, and that will be the format that we'll use today, tonight, and tomorrow. Without further ado, we should call Mr. Nahas.
Mr. Nahas, please take the stand.
One more thing I want to say is that you'll notice that none of the jurors and none of the witnesses are being sworn. It seemed to us that in a grand jury you have to swear witnesses to get some kind of coerced truth out of them. And we don't have to do that because we know and we depend that people will speak the truth. That's why we're all here. We want to find out about it. So we're not going to have any of those kind of staged manifestations of coerced truth, because the truth is going to be brought forward here by the people.
Mr. Nahas, will you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Angula Nahas, Angula.
And
In fact, if you are using the Western style of addressing to me, you have to say Mr. Angula.
Mr. Angula. You are a native Namibian, are you not?
Yes, I am.
And you have lived near the Tsumeb mine in the northern part of Namibia?
Yes, I was born around that area.
Can you tell the grand jurors how does the Tsumeb mine acquire its laborers?
To understand the operations and the activities of the Tsumeb mine, you have to have a background of the political and social activities in Namibia itself. The operations and activities of any mining corporation or any employing agencies in Namibia are guided by the laws and regulations of the apartheid regime in Namibia.
Is that regime an extension of the government of South Africa?
Indeed it is.
And are Namibian people required to pay taxes and cash money once a year to the government of South Africa?
In fact, that is one way of forcing them to look for work in the mines and other employing agencies. The workers, most of them who are concentrated in the reserves where they are forced to live, because of the fact that they have to pay annual levies and taxes, they have to look for employment in white-owned companies so that they can meet those obligations.
So an individual signs the labor contract.
Okay, thanks for the break of time to the afternoon to you. How about your green night?
The contract ranges from 12 months to 18 months. The terms are very simple, that you have to accept the work and be guided by the whims and the wishes of your employer. You have no say about that.
Do they grade people according to their physical conditions and various types of work jobs?
Indeed they do. What we have is that people are graded in terms of whether you are physically fit, strong enough to work in the mines and the related jobs, or to work in the hotels and the service industries, or to work in the agricultural sector. So a guy like this one, who is obviously a mine worker, must have received an A grade.
And an individual who receives a B grade, where does he work?
Those who receive B grades usually work in the service industries.
And those who receive C grades, where do they work?
They usually work in the farms, in the agricultural sector.
What is the rate of pay for an individual a month if he is black and he is employed by contract?
It really depends where you work. If you are working in the mine, your average wage should be about $25. But if you are working in the farm, you are likely to receive something like $10 per month.
And if you're working as a bellboy in the hotel, how much do you make?
Then you are in between, perhaps $15 or something.
Now, are the people housed and fed when they are brought into Namibia by contract labor?
When they brought rather in the central region where much of the organized economy or rather money economy is, I think that's what you're supposed to, what you're trying to say. Well, what you have is that, as we have seen in the film, people are kept in the compound, so-called compound. These are isolated buildings which are surrounded by high walls and also by barbed wire. You've got one entrance. So they are prison-like buildings. I think you must have seen them in the film, but if you haven't been there, perhaps it's difficult really to visualize how they look like. To enter that type of compound, you have to have a special pass, or as you have seen the film, people have got some rings like this with numbers there. If you are passing through the gate, you have to show your number, that you are really, truly an employed person in that particular company.
What are the hours people work in the mine? How long?
Well, you have is that you have about 2 shifts. One shift enters the mine in the morning and comes out at 6 o'clock in the evening. And another one enters at 6 o'clock in the evening and comes out at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Are you familiar? What is the survival rate for a man who goes down in the mine?
Well, there really, to put it bluntly, we don't survive, we exist, subsist.
What I mean by that?
What they are paid are subsistence wages, and they have to supplement that with working in the reserves to cultivate their own crops. Otherwise, they can't live on that.
How many people die in those mines?
Several die, but no records are kept for obvious reasons.
Can you tell us what the impact to the family is of a mine?
It's very serious and destructive. Imagine a household with kids, young kids, and the wife left by the head of the family for something like 18 months. You've got kids growing up without enjoying the company of their father, and you have the father staying all that time in the compounds or underground in the mine. It's very serious indeed. In the process, you have many families broken up. In the process, you have many kids alienated from their own fathers. So the impact is really great. It's difficult to measure, but it is felt.
Have these conditions led to Namibian people organizing?
Indeed they did. Actually, SWAPO grew out of the workers' protest against their conditions. It started first as a workers' movement, but because of the fact that the workers are not allowed to organize themselves in the trade unions, it turned out to be a political party. That is how SWAPO started, as a workers' movement campaigning against the working conditions.
What What type of food do they have?
Well, usually they have what is called mealie pap. It is a meal prepared out of mealie meal and water. And usually they are given sugar to eat that type of stuff with. I think you must have seen from the film that the nutritious value of that type of stuff is very questionable.
Are they charged for the housing they receive out of their pay?
They don't receive housing. They live in compounds.
In the compound?
Compounds, you live in something like you're in the church here. You got your bed there, on top of it there's a bed there and something like that. It's not really housing as such. These are dormitories of some sort.
Are they considered part of the wages that an individual receives?
They are.
Is the food considered part of the wages that an individual receives?
It is.
And out of the $25 a month he receives, how much does a man have when he returns home? If he returns home after a year or 18 months?
Well, those who are able to save, they will perhaps have something like, if you take that he has been working for 18 months times 25, my arithmetic is not very good, but those who have got good arithmetic can calculate that. But you then take something like 1/3 of that. That is what he will be able perhaps to take home, because he has to buy little things around to try to better his life. He has to try to find little social activities around, and in the process he ends up spending all that.
Can you tell the people of the grand jury what has been the total impact on the Namibian people by Amex in relationship to their mining operations in Namibia?
The total impact is really difficult to measure, but it is felt. The oppression, the exploitation, degradation is felt by the people. And perhaps that is well illustrated by 1974-72 strike, which you have seen in the film here, when people, despite the fact that they are not allowed to go on strike, decided to do so because of the oppressive working conditions.
And are the people continuing to organize because of the economic and physical conditions on the job with Amex?
The people continue to organize, particularly on the political level, because they believe that it is only by seizure of power, to have the reins of power in their hands, that they can improve their own conditions.
Does the Tsumeb mine have a historical meaning to the people of Namibia?
It has.
Can you explain to the grand jury what that relationship is?
As I told you earlier, I was born in that area. My forefathers used to go to that area. They used to mine there, and they used to make their tools out of that metal which is mined out of the Tsumeb mine. When the white man came, he never consulted them. He simply took over the exploitation of the mineral resources, and he forced them to work for him and exploiting their labor. So the impact is very tremendous. It's really felt.
Now, does that area have any religious value to you? In your traditional
Can you restate that again?
the traditional religions of your people? Does that particular area have any particular value, religious value?
Of course, as you know that in Africa we regard ourselves to be close to the land. And the land on which Tsumeb mine is located, in pre-colonial times, it belonged to my people. And they feel that they have been robbed. And it is indeed an injury to their traditions and their culture.
In summing up your testimony, will you please state to the grand jury any other matters that you would like to relate to them about the conditions of your people?
Really, it is difficult to go into the history of the exploitation in Namibia. Rather, I would argue the grand jury to declare Tsumeb mine, and through Tsumeb mine, all the other exploiting multinational companies in Namibia as outlaws in the modern human experience and history.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Are there any questions from the grand jury? Thank you, Michael.
Yes, could you tell me if all companies, you said that all companies are subject to the laws of the apartheid regime. Does the American company differ from any of the government-owned companies in their adherence to the laws of the apartheid regime? Is there any noticeable difference?
There cannot be any notes of difference, otherwise they will break the law of the country. And companies have to obey the laws of the particular country in which they are operating. Whatever they say, it is not simply true that they are improving the lives of the people. How can you improve the lives of the people when the laws cannot give you that leverage without breaking those laws?
Okay. Are contract laborers allowed to have their families present with them, or are they isolated from their families during this period of time of labor?
They are never allowed to stay with their families. That's why we are discussing about the effect of the contract system on the family life. You have to go away from your family for 8 months, and sometimes you come back, you stay for 3 months, but because of the demands of taxes and other demands, you have to go back and work, which means that in the period perhaps of 20 years, you might only stay with your family for 5 years, but at various intervals.
Are there any, you mentioned that there were strikes. Are those strikes legal? Are they recognized strikes? Do you have any legal union organizing activities among laborers? Is it recognized?
The apartheid laws of South Africa do not recognize or allow any trade unions to be organized by the black labor force. It is illegal in itself.
Are the white contract laborers also present at the company? Native Southwest African white contract laborers?
They got their contracts, but not contracts in the terms of the contract labor system. Mm-hmm. They are employed under certain conditions to which they themselves have agreed to. Okay. You sign a contract, it's a direct one-to-one relationship. That if the white fellow does not want to take that job, he can leave it. If he thinks that there's other job somewhere where he can go and earn better, he can do that. Whereas with an African, if you are recruited, that you are being hired by Tsumeb mine. Tsumeb mine has the overall control of you without you saying anything. Whether your wages are low, your living conditions are low, or what, you have just to accept what's given. You have no way of changing it.
Okay. Are there redress procedures for white workers? Can they have a union?
Of course, yes. Of course, yes.
Is the pay for housing?
They will send you back to your rural area. Perhaps they will, if you are lucky enough, if you live near some mission hospitals, you will be sent there. But as long as you are not able to do any job, they immediately send you back to your reserve, where you came from. Because you are no more a labor agent anymore. You are not no more, you can't produce anything anymore, so you are not useful.
Is there anyone else with a question?
Right. What are some of the punishments brought on if you break the apartheid laws? What are some of the evil doings or punishments that are brought on your people when you break the laws brought on the Namibians?
When you break the laws, many things can happen to you. You can be arrested and put in prison. You can be arrested, taken to a police charge office, and beaten up there. They want and let you go after being beaten. You can be arrested and fined, depending upon the nature of your crime or whatever it is, how they define it. And to be arrested is not really a problem. A simple little mistake that you have left your pass somewhere, your so-called identity paper somewhere, makes you liable to arrest. Then you are taken, then you are handled in the manner they feel like handling you, depending upon particular police officers who arrest you.
Mr. Angola, you said that a white worker could leave the job anytime he liked. You said a white worker could leave the job anytime he liked. What happened to a black worker if he would leave his job? You know, would he be breaking the contract and breaking the law?
You can't dare to do so. If you do that, your employer will report to the police. Give all your details. You know, when you are employed, you have to sign, you have to stamp, they have to take all your fingerprints, your pictures, and all that type of thing. So they report you to the police that this fellow has left job. Look for him. They will look for you. If they catch you, then you are tried with dissertation that you have decided from your boss. You have decided from the job. When, say, you leave a reserve and you go to work in the mine people give you a certain document which binds you to that mine. If you leave the mine and that document is no more valid, then you are not supposed to be there anymore in that particular area. So, in the first place,